to.
So if we can help our clients increase their awareness to see the possibilities that are there, but they just can't see with the limited, awareness. And I started to believe that, look, if we can somehow elevate our consciousness, I'm not even sure what that means, right? But if we can become more aware, if we can become more conscious, that's what will help eliminate or resolve, these fundamental challenges we're facing. So I don't want to go necessarily get involved in one thing about, one particular cause, but instead work closer to the root of what I think is the root of these things.
And coaching just seems to be the right vehicle for that outcome versus mentoring, versus therapy. They have their aspects where they touch on that. But if you're looking for expediency and just a fine focus on that is the goal, coaching seems to be the right vehicle.
Mr. Dean Miles, how are you?
Mr. Brilliant Miller, I'm doing fantastic.
Good. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Coaches Commonplace book.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Let's go find the dark corners and see what we find.
And shine light. That's the hope. That's what you'd hope for a guy named Brilliant to do, right?
Yes.
So in this podcast, I'm really interested, Dean, in exploring coaching, what it is, how to do it effectively, how to earn a living, how to enjoy it. So as we've talked about, sometimes the dark corners of coaching, sometimes the things that are right in front of us.
Yes.
Stuff that's not necessarily obvious, but it's also not all that complicated. Right?
All excellent points. And my mind just went to, it's so important to turn on the lights, but sometimes it's good to sit in the dark for a second.
True.
Right. And it's in that reflection. It's when you can't see anything. And it's just, tell me what you remember. Tell me what's real. Tell me what's true. I know where that took me off of this tangent. Yeah. But I think that's part of what we do, in this hour that we spend together is we turn on the light, but sometimes we go sit in the dark, right? And sit in the corner and think about your life.
But I am reminded that Tony Robbins assures us that confusion simply means you're about to have a breakthrough.
I like that a lot. Boy, I have to rely on that. That's true.
But today we will not be confused. We have a plan for this conversation. And the plan looks like this, right? So we'll talk about my journey to coaching.
Yes. We all want to know
a little bit about whether coaching certification matters, how important it is, whether it's worthwhile investing your time and your energy and finding a coaching certification program and we'll talk, if time allows, about writing, about the creative process, about what you're learning from a master of the craft, Mr. Mark Ryder, New York Times bestseller, and also affirmations, whether they're worthwhile, whether they're useful for us as coaches to work with, whether it's a tool that we ought to offer to our clients, encourage them to at least explore. So that's a lot to cover in.
It's good stuff. Brilliant. Great stuff. So start us off. I think inquiring minds want to know, what has been your journey with coaching? What do you remember from the first time you were made aware of the concept?
Well, it was more than 10 years ago. So as we record this, here it is in March of 2023. It's more than 10 years ago. I was at a point in my life where I was facing some transitions, some uncertainty, personally and professionally. Looking back, I think that's just life, isn't it? There's always opportunities. There's always, challenges. But I was at a point where it felt pretty acute for me. I was in a job that I didn't love. I had just exited a marriage, had begun a new relationship, and things that, looking back, I realized there are big questions of identity and, life goals, combined with the fact that probably was a midlife crisis or somewhere near. And it even included a sports car. So I can confirm that is true. And I said to my wife, or the woman who's not my wife, I said, I think I could use a coach. I think I could benefit. I don't know much about it. I don't know anybody that's a coach. I've done therapy in the past and that was useful, but it's not what I think I need more of. I need something different. I'm not looking for a mentor per se, and at the time I was reading a book. I was reading a book called The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. And if you've seen this book, I think it's like 500 pages, and it's this huge tome of all this stuff that Jack Canfield, this master teacher, has learned in his, I think at the time he was probably in his 60s, of his decades and decades of teaching personal growth. So I'm reading this book, and Heather Dawn says, why don't you call Jack? Why don't you call the author of that book you're reading and see if he will coach you? And it hadn't even occurred to me, this is a real person. At some abstract level, I knew people write books, but I certainly hadn't thought I'll call that guy and see if he'll work with me. So I called, got through to somebody at his organization and learned that, yes, Jack does coach with individuals, but it's a pretty hefty fee. I think at the time it was like $100,000 and there was a 6-month waiting list. And
wow.
And I said, wow, that's, not really in the realm of possibility for me at this time. You have anything else? Like anything normal people can afford? And the person I talked to said, Jack does this training program once a year called TTT, Train the Trainer. And it's kind of an amalgam of practices that Jack uses. And it's everything from public speaking to coaching to facilitating, all this. And I asked a few more questions and then ended up signing up for it. I think it was still pretty expensive. It was $15,000. It was a 3-week in person. So it was a big commitment to travel.
Yeah. Wow.
A couple of the weeks were in California. One was in Arizona, and it was staggered. So one was in March, one was in June, one was in October. And it didn't lead to an ICF certification or anything like that. But at that time, that didn't matter to me because, again, I was looking for coaching, not to necessarily to become a coach. And I went and did the program. And in between those 3 weeks, there was coaching with, there were exercises. We had assignments.
Right.
And then we would coach other participants and they would coach us. So there was just a very rich experience. There were about 70 people in the program. And it was transformational. It was enjoyable. I learned a ton. I filled a notebook. I was the guy there on the front row many days, just taking notes. And in that, just having the experience to coach, to get the practice of it and to be coached and to see the clarity that can come from it in something like literally as little as 5 minutes, a little 5-minute practice session, when you're sharing real issues in a safe space and so forth.
Yes.
It was awesome. And that just confirmed for me that was what I want to do. Those are the people that I want to surround myself with and interact with. And so that was really it. And I left that program still not really knowing, okay, how do I organize my life around this? How do I earn money from this? How do I even, continue with the momentum and the principles that we have? But Jack was very generous, sharing what he knew. And he said, look, if you leave here and you want to keep on this, he said, use my content, go home and offer workshops or use it in your sessions. And he said, this is how every stand-up comedian pretty much begins is as they're practicing at home with family and friends and they're young and so forth. They'll see what they'll share what they saw on TV.
Yes.
And until they find their own voice, until they find their own message.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think that that's where the seed was planted? This vision that you have for a world where coaching is a realistic possibility for everyone? Did you feel that then in that moment?
No, I don't think so. I think when I think about that, I think about when I had a chance to participate in a group of young entrepreneurs and investors and philanthropists from around the world. There's this really awesome organization that I found for many next gen wealth holders. people whose parents or grandparents were, founders of organizations or inheritors of wealth. And now the next generation is saying, okay, I have these blessings, but what's my responsibility and what are my opportunities? And as I went and met with other people in that situation, I could see that there were many people. First of all, there were many people that didn't really know. They were there to discover, right? We all start somewhere. Right. But then there were other people who were very clear what their mission was, and whether it was climate change or it was human trafficking or it was, animal welfare or something like storytelling or sports for good. It was really cool how it was not everything was like an urgent activism, but there were people who were using passions and talents to improve life for others. And what I could see as I kind of looked at all these causes or all of these opportunities was none of them really resonated with me to the point that was the thing I wanted to just latch onto. But B, more than that, I could see, look, at the root of any one of these issues or these opportunities, quite frankly, I think what's really at essence is consciousness, right? And if we can, I believe, and this was something I learned from Jack in that Train the Trainer. He said, look, your job as a coach is to help your clients expand their awareness in order to increase the range and quality of choices available to them.
Yeah, so good. In order to. So if we can help our clients increase their awareness to see the possibilities that are there, but they just can't see with the limited, awareness. And I started to believe that, look, if we can somehow elevate our consciousness, I'm not even sure what that means, right? But if we can become more aware, if we can become more conscious, that's what will help eliminate or resolve, these fundamental challenges we're facing. So I don't want to go necessarily get involved in one thing about, one particular cause, but instead work closer to the root of what I think is the root of these things. And coaching just seems to be the right vehicle for that outcome versus mentoring, versus therapy. They have their aspects where they touch on that. But if you're looking for expediency and just a fine focus on that is the goal, coaching seems to be the right vehicle.
I think so. And I think that partly because there are some, at least the way I've learned it, the way I think I like to think I practice it, that there are some beliefs implicit in coaching, right? Whereas with therapy, and I don't mean to disparage therapy. Again, I'm a believer. There's a time and a place, absolutely. But I think there's a tendency, or at least there has been historically, for therapy to have this orientation of like, you're dysfunctional and we're going to restore you to function.
Yes.
Right. And with coaching, there's this orientation of, look, you're already whole and complete and perfect. You might not experience yourself that way. You might not experience life that way, but that's the work. It's not to fix you. It's to help you experience the wholeness and perfection that you are, or that life is. Right. And again, for me, just talking about it, there's an aspect of it that starts to bleed into a little metaphysical.
Yes.
But I think there's something really deep and profound about that. And it's not to just avoid unpleasant truths or, the reality of things, but it's also to recognize that so much of life ceases to be a problem when we truly stop seeing it as problematic.
It's so true and brilliant. For those that are watching the podcast, they saw what I just saw, where you transitioned from your head into this heartfelt reality of something that is just capital T true. It's just truth. Man, does that make a difference? And it makes me think, so you've had this experience, you did the TNT, Train the Trainer, you then walk out, fast forward a little bit to you're putting up a shingle, you're going to go try to find a client. You're not making money off of this yet, right? You just had your own enlightenment, your own awareness. What were some of the next steps? How did you then transition to becoming a good coach, a great coach, and then putting some dollars in the bank?
Well, there's this common saying, right? We teach what we need to learn, right? Or the instruction, physician, heal thyself, right? Not that I'm a MD, but this idea, start with yourself. And I knew, human beings are social creatures, right? We need each other. And
indeed,
for so many reasons. And there was a time, this was January of probably 2018. And I was in Washington, D.C. at the time. It was cold. And I had this idea that I wanted to write down and share things that I had learned. I think first for myself, to just capture them, wrestle with these ideas, start to refine them, organize them, see if they stand up to the test of my own intellectual scrutiny, which shouldn't be too hard, right? No, but really to just start to play with them. And then I knew that I wanted to share them with other people and invite them to respond. And what have you seen? And what are what's your experience related to this? And what questions come up for you? And I didn't know it at the time. I don't think I had this distinction so clear, but what I was really asking was, what does it mean to live a good life? And how can we do it? Right? Are there best practices? Are there first principles? Right? And I'm convinced there are. Right? I'm convinced that living is a skill, just like driving a stick shift or baking a cake. And we might have some aptitude for it, or maybe we're not so skilled at the beginning or whatever, but it is something we can learn to do. And I said, well, if that's true, I certainly want to know this for myself. I want to share it with other people and continue to learn from them. So I wrote down, I started with an outline and started to organize these thoughts. And then I invited about 100 people to be my accountability partners in this process of writing it down. And I said, look, here's how this would work. I suppose this will be a book. That's the form. Could take a lot of forms. But I said, I want to write a book, and here's what it's about. And I said, and here's how I'd love for you to be involved is I will write a chapter a week. I'll send you one chapter a week. I want you to read it, answer the questions, do the exercises, get on a group call with me, have a discussion, give me your feedback, and then do it again next week. And so of those 100 people that I emailed, friends, family, a few acquaintances, former clients, about 50 said, I'm interested. Tell me more. What are the details? What day will we meet? And how much time am I going to spend each week? And, who else is there? Stuff like this, the practical things.
Right.
And of those 50 that said, tell me more, 30, I think it was 33 said, I'm in. I was like, that's great. Now I'm on the hook. Now I get to write this thing for real. And I went through it, and it took me 18 weeks. And again, I just had an outline. And when I started on my own of just saying, I'm going to do this no matter what. I got into it a couple of weeks and realized just how emotionally challenging it was, even with this intention and desire. Found a friend who's a very talented, creative and emotional support human and writer. And he was my collaborator through that. And by the way, I had an ops person who configured this, that every Sunday morning, I think it was Sunday morning at 7 or 8 a.m., the draft went out. So it didn't matter what state it was in. That group of 33 people was going to get the content then. Wow, that's good. So there were many nights that I stayed up till sunrise, till that, working through the weekend and getting it up. And so that resulted in getting this content written of what I now call life's best practices. But I acknowledge it's a little different from coaching, right? Because that's content and that's a group program. There's an element of coaching that can happen or that's related to it. But that was a big part of my journey.
But then take us here and we'll land the plane on that topic and go into this certification and explore that. What have you realized that's become your coaching superpower?
Well, when you asked me that before we started recording, I had one thought.
Yeah.
And now I'm having a different thought, right? The thought I had when you asked me the first time was there's a lot. Part of it is rapport. Like rapport is this invisible, it's often invisible, or it was to me before someone pointed it out and talked about what it is, how to use it, why it's important, like all this. But being able to develop enough of a relationship with someone that you can challenge them safely, right? That they trust you, that there are things you can do to develop rapport. And I don't know that I'm a master of that, but I at least make an effort. Right. So that's one.
It's really good. It's really good. It makes me think about this. And it's something we've evolved to at Bridgepoint. We have an expectation at Bridgepoint that 9 out of 10 people that you're coaching, when you walk out of the room, they need to be mumbling to themselves, wow, Dean gets me.
Mm.
Yes, 10 out of 10, but you're always going to have that one. But set that goal of 9 out of 10. So even my experience in junior high and high school, I was friends with the smokers. I played violin, so I was friends with all the musicians. I was president of the chess club, so I was friends with all the nerds. And I played on the football team. And so I just kind of learned those skill sets of I was friends with everybody in the high school and connected with them differently. I think of Covey's speed of trust, to what level can you earn the trust of nearly everyone? I think if you're going to be a great coach, and more importantly, if you're going to get paid, if you're only good with 10% of the people on the planet, you've really narrowed down your market.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that ability to develop rapport it's huge. And I don't think a coach can truly be effective without it. I think you can be a teacher without rapport.
I would agree.
I think you could
be a different exchange, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely
more transactional.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that. And then one thing that I think about too is I think about something I read General James Mathis said about the most effective leaders are brilliant in the basics. That's what he says, his term.
Yeah,
right?
That's good.
And this fundamental disciplines applied consistently. And the reason that I'm saying that is one of the fundamental disciplines for a coach, and something I like to think I'm good at, is helping to define an outcome, right? Because it's easy for a coaching session to, I would say, devolve into story time or commiseration or explanation or a lot of talking that really isn't productive. And there's a time and a place for that, for the expression and the sympathetic ear and like all this. But at the same time, if that's not in service to an outcome, well, what is it that you want? And then being able to relate that back and sometimes redirect or sometimes cut people off and in service to them producing their outcome.
That's right.
So I think that's one, is just putting a context around a conversation oriented toward the achievement or the realization of an outcome that's chosen by the client, right? It's not up to me.
That's right.
To tell them what the outcome is. Sometimes it's to remind them, or to understand. So I would say, that's another one that I might say superpower is just helping a client like define and remain oriented toward an outcome that matters to them.
Here's what I'm hearing. It's less of what you're saying, and it's more that you've identified something. Because I've asked coaches, especially aspiring coaches, what's your superpower? And unfortunately, their shoulders do this. I just like people. And that's good, right? I mean, and that could be their superpower, but it's the uncertainty that I'm concerned on their behalf.
Right.
Right. Be certain and be wrong, but pick something.
Yeah.
Right. And go get some feedback on it. Where did that just take you? What are you thinking about?
Well, I think you're right. And I think this is part of like being consciously competent.
Yeah. Good words.
Right. Of knowing what it is you're doing. Because again, I do think a coach is a practitioner. This is sometimes there's, a hammer and sometimes it's a hacksaw and sometimes it's a feather. There's different tools at your disposal.
That's right. Questions
are one of those, right? Being aware of different types of questions, using them in different ways at different times, I could go deeper on that, but I think just having that awareness of this is a craft. I think coaching is a craft. It's a skill and knowing that it's not a formula necessarily. I do think there's some linearity to it. And I actually teach that in my coach training program. And I've been a little surprised to have this feedback from participants when I'll lay out on one slide, I call it the anatomy of a coaching conversation. And it begins with rapport, by the way. Check in, how you doing? Like this.
Yes.
And then for me, it ends with question of what was most valuable for you here and a commitment to help ensure action, right? But there is a structure, but there's also an art.
Yeah. Well, I think this transitions well into the certification.
Yeah.
But this is an art and this is a process. Well, is that what certification is all about? So why don't you kind of set that up for us?
Yeah. So when you and I talked a few months back in one of these Coaches Commonplace conversations, I'm sure that listeners have just been on edge waiting for us to come back.
Let's assume that.
And close that loop about certification. Does it matter? Like why or why not? And I am of the opinion that it matters if it matters to you, right? And it matters if whether or not it matters depends on what you want. No surprise, it's life's operative question is what do you want? But I think that here's the, I guess if I try to distill it, in my decade plus of being a coach, observing other coaches, working with being coached, I have come to believe absolutely that there are great coaches who are not certified by any certifying body. Right. And conversely, there are coaches that I think are not effective. They are not great coaches. I don't even think they're good coaches in my sole judgment, and they are certified. So like everything, there are probably good dentists and bad dentists and good mechanics and bad mechanics. There are good coaches and not so good coaches. Yes. And whether or not they're certified is no indicator of whether or not they're good or whether or not they're right for you. And part of this is
they're getting paid.
Right. Or if they're getting paid. Absolutely. So that's my fundamental take, is that I don't think a certification in and of itself matters, but it's also like this, that, right, if you believe that the purpose of a goal is not in the outcome of the goal, it's not in the trophy or the pile of cash or the car or whatever, but it's in what you become on the way to that goal. And a certification can be that thing. It's like, is a certification valuable? Probably not as valuable as what you might become in the process of pursuing the certification.
I really like that. Brilliant. I mean, when we say, is it necessary? We're assuming that there's a desired outcome. Is it necessary to get paid or to land a job? There's always the exceptions, but as a general rule, for someone who's been full-time coaching for 17 years, certification is not going to help you close a contract. It just isn't, because there's enough noise in the environment that people have met the master certified coaches. They can't make a living coaching. They make their living coaching by helping someone else get certified as a master certified coach. That's their business model. And if you want to do that, that's fantastic. But getting that certification doesn't help you get the contract or to land the client. As a general rule, will it make you a better coach? My experience, not in the process of just getting the certification. Where I got the most value and where I ask people to go get certified in something is for one reason: to practice and to get feedback, to find out where are you uncomfortable coaching. And so I was through this pickmybrain.world. I've talked about this in previous podcasts. It's a great collection of people that have volunteered themselves to pick my brain. And there are thousands of people that have put themselves on the website for free. And you could talk to anyone on the planet for a half hour. So one of the first persons I talked to, I won't use her name, but she was the first Iranian woman to win the world championship in kickboxing.
Well, this shouldn't be hard to Google, Dean.
No, I'm with you on that, but I'm not saying
it's
she's
one
on.
thing.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, full disclosure. Here's why I don't want to mention her name, because I don't remember it. So that's full disclosure. Why I'm not mentioning your name. It's just I'm drawing a blank. My age is showing. So it's not that it's a secret. I just don't remember it. But she tells this story of how she had been practicing. And then she went and got a coach to get her ready for the world championships. And that's when she realized the gap between regular training and world championship training. Like, she wasn't even close. So now when I think about, I had a natural coaching ability, and I've had some coaching moments, which put me on this path to go get certified as a coach. What I then realized was the gap between where I was and where I needed to be, not to just be a coach, but to be a masterful coach. So it wasn't about insight for me. It wasn't about my ability. It wasn't about the results. It was how much pain was I willing to self-inflict to get better, and to what level would I be willing to practice? Like, run the track till you're vomiting, to do those football practices where you're doing twice a day on Saturdays, where you're just on the edge of heat exhaustion. Was I willing to do that level of practice? Because I wanted to be a masterful coach. That's why I think certification matters. Because I don't know where else you can get pushed like that.
Yeah. And it can be hard to push yourself like that.
Well, I won't. I can clarify that to everybody. Left to my own devices, I will take the easiest route possible. Yeah.
Well, that's all organisms, right? We avoid pain and we move toward pleasure. We're all very basic creatures in some way. No, I'm with you. And I can see that that's a huge benefit of a certification program. So I see that. And I think too, as I've looked at this, because you and I both have earned an ICF certification. So we're speaking as people who have gone through this. And again, I advocate it for anyone who has done some hard thinking, talked to others, and still says, yeah, this is important to me because of who my clients are, or because of, how I want to present myself or whatever. The one thing that I look at is I just really encourage anyone who is in that situation of, looking to grow their practice, wondering if getting a certification is the thing that's going to take them to the next level, is whether or not you're looking at this to solve some problems for you that it really won't.
That's good.
Right. And the thing I think about here is I have a friend who has an employee who she had a car. So my friend's employee had a car, and she crashed the car, and she owed some money on the car, even though it got destroyed. It wasn't totaled, so she didn't get an insurance check. Right. But as her employer, he paid the debt on her car. Gives her this check. That was over the weekend. She comes in on Monday morning. She's got a new car with new debt. So she's just recreated this situation for herself.
Yes.
Right. And as he explained this to me, he said, what I learned from that was money can't solve money problems. Right. If this is a mentality of like somebody who will continuously just put themselves in a disadvantageous financial situation, just paying off somebody's debt for them doesn't change the underlying mentality. Right. Right. And the reason that I think of that story in relation to a certification is if you have some kind of, I don't know what to call it, because I don't want to judge it. Like, I don't want to say like a scarcity mindset, but if you have this orientation of, I need something else, I'm not ready yet. Right. Just checking that box probably won't make you feel any more ready. You're going to be left with that underlying sense of, I'm not good enough yet, or I need something more. So good, more.
Brilliant. So good.
Right? And that's part of why I guess I would say caution, or at least encourage people to think really deeply about what's motivating them to get the certification, and hopefully not this false belief of like, when I have it, then I'll be ready to start growing my practice.
Right. Yeah. Those are really wise words. I would encourage you, if you're listening right now, pause, back that up about 5 minutes and listen to that again. Otherwise, you're really setting yourself for disappointment.
Yeah, potentially.
Potentially. And I certainly had I didn't have the most pure motives when I was going through certification. I was already doing some contract coaching for a smaller firm. And what their guarantee or their promise statement to their clients is that all of the coaches are certified or in the process of becoming certified. So I started certification thinking I was really good at coaching with a high level of certainty. And I was humbled. And I was humbled quick, which then set me on the path. And I told the story last week of how the professor told me, Dean, you mastered the art of fake curiosity. And had I ever. So that's where I got reoriented of really why was I doing the certification? And it wasn't to help me get clients. It was really to help me get out of my own way and to achieve this masterful status without being an idiot.
Well, Dean, let's talk a little bit about earning recognition and money as a coach. So we've talked about, whether or not it makes sense to go through the pain of getting a certification, but whether or not one does, then we're still faced with clients. How do I let people know that this is what I'm doing? How do I let people know that I might be able to help them? Right. How do I put myself out there in any way that might be appropriate? And I know you've been taking a class from, or engaging in conversations with,
yes,
Mark Ryder, who's Marshall Goldsmith's co-writer, editor, right? An agent. He's like a unicorn in the world of publishing. Very magical
very
creature.
Much so.
So what a privilege for you to connect with him every week for this. I don't know what's the next level above masterclass, doing this Uber masterclass, right? But I understand you've been talking about memoirs, about writing.
We have, yeah. So
what have you been talking about lately?
He has been, so this has been over the course of a year, actually just over a year, just a writer's workshop with Mark Ryder, right? Spelled differently, but nice play on the words. And a couple of themes come to play here that I will take as coaching, but also to be the author of something, to reshare or to tell your own story, whether that be fiction or nonfiction, I guess. And he pulls on some of William Zinsner. And if you're not familiar with who that is, it's worth going and Googling that and finding some of his writing books. And it's really, really challenging, but there's some themes in there. And it starts with, you need to be yourself. And it's such a good reminder. I did this incorrectly. And every coach, and this has probably been over 50 coaches that have come through Bridgepoint that's on our bench. And I've watched every one of them make the same mistake. We hired them because they're a really good coach. And then when they come in, they start acting like a coach, which is not the same. I did it when I went through certification. I started pretending and acting like how a coach should act as opposed to just being myself.
What do you mean? Like, what's an example of that? What do you see in these coaches that you hire, or maybe in yourself?
I change even the tone of my voice. I start to get breathy. Now let's talk about you. What's become more clear here? I don't talk like that. I don't talk like that anywhere else in my life. Yeah. And all of a sudden that feels coach-like. I
call that the HR voice.
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, come on in and sit down and let's have a conversation.
Let's talk. Yeah. Yes. So this idea of be yourself. That's the first one. Second is just use concrete ideas and details. So to get out of this generalization, to specialize, right? To really know what you're talking about. And I think that's some of the processes that you were talking about. Aim for simplicity. I like this one a lot. Show, don't tell. So rather than simply telling, I'm looking at my notes here. Show the reader what happened and how they felt, as opposed to just telling someone what happened. And so another version he gave of this, brilliant, was people are more interested to know what you've learned versus what you know. Because if I tell you, here's what I know, You can say you're wrong. And here's the 10, and you can counter it. But if I say, here's what I've learned, or here's what I experienced, there's no counter to that. It's just my own story. Use humor, and then just be honest and open, and just really get great reminders.
Yeah. I can see that in my dad, where he wrote his autobiography, and he was, as I knew him, he was always a very open, authentic person. But that's a comment I've heard over the years since he wrote his book about, I can't believe how honest your dad was about what it was really like to build that business, or about the challenges he faced, or about experiences with people that I had read about in the newspaper. And then here he is, So that's true. And I've heard it said that the intimate is the most universal. And so this idea of when we are like, I don't want to say honest, but when we do share,
yes,
that people do connect with that, because partly I do think it's rare, so it's no surprise.
Unfortunately, one of the books that Mark was the author of a memoir, the opening sentence is, everyone has a secret. Here's mine. And I think it's a brilliant opening line, because I found it to be true. And when you can get to a place, I think, my own personal, as a coach, you talk about rapport. When I can start off with, in a coaching relationship, here's my limp, right? Because I think we all walk with a limp. Jeffrey Emmelt, who took over for Jack Welch at General Electric, talked about, if you wanted to be on his team, you needed to have gone through a crisis. So don't create the crisis, different conversation. But he wanted to know that you've gone through a crisis. This means that you've been on your knees, you've been in the trenches, and you survived it. He doesn't want you to find out if you have what it takes on his watch, right? I want you tested. I think those that I coach makes me more human when I tell my own story of, here's the mistakes that I've made, here's the pain I've suffered, and here's what I've learned through it. So I just shared my secret. Now, you want to share yours. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, in this, as you know, Dean, writing is something that I'm just so fascinated by. And someone pointed out to me that there's a reason we call it spelling. There is a magic to language.
I've never thought of that before. That's good.
It's pretty remarkable, and the incredible power of language. And not that every coach needs to write their book. I know many want to, and for various reasons don't, but the power in that. And I just wanted to capitalize on a few of your lessons and insights, as you've had this opportunity over the last year to learn from Mark. So thanks for
giving me that chance. Mark he gives a statistic, and Marshall Goldsmith also says it. If you wanted to be, I'm going to mess this up, but maybe you've heard them say it, brilliant. If you wanted to be like in the top 50% of book sales, how many books should you have sold to get into that top 50%?
It's a crazy low number.
It's 2.
Yeah. There's more than 1 million books on Amazon right now that have 0 sales.
0. That's exactly right. I thought, what an interesting statistic. Because you said everyone wants to write this story. And I think there is something in us that wants to tell our story and to be heard.
Yeah. And there's something in us that resists it as well.
Yes, no, that's true too.
It's like the opposition in all things. No surprise. We want to be seen, but we also want to hide. We want to be in love, but we want to avoid commitment. There's all this, every strength has a weakness kind of thing. Well, just on the power of language, Dean, let's talk now about affirmations.
Yes.
And talk about the power of affirmations and whether they're garbage or whether they're useful, whether we ought to start working with them, keep working with them, encourage our clients to work with them. What's your view? Affirmations, are they worthwhile, or have we been sold a bill of goods?
So I am taking a class by Dr. Srikumar Rao, and the name of the class is Creativity and Personal Mastery. And he makes a statement, very provocative. I know he does this on purpose because it gets people's attention, like he did for me. And it's that we've been trained our whole lives to be unhappy, is what Dr. Rao said. And I was like, man, is this true? And it's just this idea that if I, when I get this is the if thing then, or the if then.
Yeah, this is what I love Marshall calls this the great Western disease. Yes. I'll be happy when.
Yes. Yes. And so if you're a good boy, you can get some ice cream, right?
I think it's true in the East now too, though.
What? Very much so. Yeah. Yeah. This disease has spread. So I think because of that, it creates this mental chatter. I have it, and it's nearly constant. And it can be from a place where everything's out to get me, and the world's unfriendly, and the universe is unfriendly, and I've upset the gods. When you sacrifice someone or someone to please them. So it's from there, I think the affirmations are important because it can reframe you to something that's more optimistic. That as we're trying to avoid pain, we're trying to avoid uncertainty, we're trying to avoid hard work, the affirmation gives me just enough hope that maybe I have a chance.
Yeah.
So those are my original thoughts. So take it, because I want to hear what you've been thinking on this.
So something I think about with affirmations is, I think there's a doctor, I think it's Emily Coué, a French doctor in the 50s that popularized this super, super famous one, right? I think it's every day and every way I'm getting better and better. Every day and every way I'm getting better and better. And for a while, and personally, I love the old timey American, like self-help, the Think and Grow Rich, the power of positive thinking, how to win friends and influence people. Like it's just its own genre. It really is.
It is for sure.
That I'm not aware of any other country and it's largely 20th century, right? Like 1900 to. So anyway, I acknowledge like I have an affinity for that genre. Just because if nothing else, I think there's a part of it that's cute. It's like, oh, look, the people are trying.
Yeah. Yeah. Bless their hearts.
And I also acknowledge there's a lot around it about privilege and, luck and like all this other stuff. But whether or not affirmations work, whether they're useful, so going back to the question, I think you're right about like, we all have this constant stream of noise, of mental chatter. And it's like a torrent. Sometimes it's louder than others. Sometimes we're aware of it. Other times we're not. Many times it just kind of runs us, right? And it is this kind of programming, I think, in a way.
For sure. I mean, that's what marketing's based on this.
Exactly. So there's a lot that we're at the effect of, I would say. And part of what I think is a power of an affirmation is to interrupt that pattern in a way, to do it deliberately, right? And to take a statement, in other words, to take meaning and to be the creator of meaning in your life, even if only in a moment of making a statement, even if it's silent, like even if you don't say it out loud, just saying, whatever, and picking something. And then I would go beyond that. And I think there's tremendous power in that. What I look at is I kind of look at an affirmation a little bit like a boulder that you can drop a boulder in that stream of consciousness that will redirect the flow, right? Or you could build a dam or a dike or whatever metaphor.
Right.
But you can change it. And to say that doesn't have power. I know there are many people that will like diss on affirmations. And I think the thing there is like, look, to just ignore like the pain, because pain has a message, right? Yes. Or unpleasant realities or things you don't like. I think there's a time and a place to acknowledge that and not to use an affirmation like a Band-Aid.
That's right.
Right. But there's
to be delusional. Right.
Right. Not to be delusional. That's right. And so all of that, I am an advocate. And then I think about, the way Tony Robbins teaches affirmations. He doesn't teach affirmations. He teaches something called incantations, right? Which again, coming back to this magic, not that Tony teaches it any kind of magic, but instead with intensity, with intention, with intensity, with repetition of looking at it as this deliberate declaration. And I think getting to the point of this is something that, as you can tell, I get pretty geeked out about.
Yeah.
But look, we've all become who we've become, like at the level of our nervous system, because of the experiences we've had, the environments we've been in or put ourselves in. And that has, in a way, conditioned us. And we've done that almost entirely not on purpose, unintentionally.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, there was this phrase, I'm interrupting, and I want you to continue.
Yeah.
This idea of tell me what you're doing right now. And with a high level of probability, I can tell you what you will be doing 5 minutes from now.
Sure.
Because you're having a thought. Yep. And it's either serving you well or it isn't. There is really no hold, right? As the farmers will say, you're either green and growing or you're ripe and rotting. That's it, right? I mean, it's ready. It's a fleeting moment.
Yeah, that's right. Life is a dynamic process. So absolutely. And I do think that there's something powerful about taking conscious, I would say I don't like the word control, but making a conscious effort through the language we use and how we use it. Right. And I don't speak or write Sanskrit, but I've learned a little about it and about how there's this, in Hebrew is the same way, that the letters mean things. It's not just like the letter B, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but that in Sanskrit, as I understand it, every letter also has a vibration associated with it, which makes sense when you speak it, that they're all unique. And that when we use that, and this is part of the idea, I think, of a mantra, is that there's a power. We're invoking a power by using this language.
Yes.
Right. And when we do that again with intentionality, that language actually is creative, or it can be, and it can be destructive. Right. And that, I think there's something to make that process more conscious, can be incredible. So that brings me into the thing that when I wanted to talk about affirmations, I told you that I had found one that I've been working with, and I don't do affirmations every day or anything. It's not part of my routine, but I came across one in a book that's been on my list for a long time I believe it's called The Game of Life and How to Play It. Yep. The Game of Life and How to Play It by Florence Scovel Shinn. She lived from 1871 to 1940. I love that this is a woman that wrote a book about this. And she has this affirmation in this book that she offers the reader. And part of what I love about this affirmation is that it talks about destroying. It's actually, because so much in personal growth is about layering on and adding and doing more. But in this affirmation, she actually uses language to destroy. And here's the affirmation, by the way. Let's see. So she says, and I feel inclined to preface this, by the way, of course. I'm not sure if I want to, because there's this whole other thing, again, the mystical, metaphysical thing.
Yeah, just say it, and then we'll come back.
Well, let me just talk for a moment, and then I will.
The suspense is killing me.
I know. As you can see, I'm really in my head about this. And it's this idea of a Christ, right? Which is in this affirmation.
Okay.
And as I've learned Eastern traditions, and I've been introduced to the idea of a Christ consciousness separate from any individual.
Yes.
That I think is actually really powerful. In other words, it's maybe just another word for highest self or intelligence or something, right? So that's in this affirmation. I just wanted to acknowledge that, because if you hear it as some associated with some faith tradition, I think the affirmation loses some of its power.
Okay.
But
noted.
So here's what it says. I now smash and demolish by my spoken word every untrue record in my subconscious mind. They shall return to the dust heap of their native nothingness, for they came from my own vain imaginings. I now make my perfect records through the Christ within, the records of health, wealth, love, and perfect self-expression.
So good.
And that idea of smashing and demolishing by my spoken word, like to me, there's something that's just awesome and invoking the subconscious, because there's so much that I think we are so unaware of that actually, like, I don't know, forces that we can draw upon, we can use. You know, Buckminster Fuller said, don't fight forces, use them. Right. But how much is there in this universe that what's that saying about the universe is full of, what is that saying? Full of like amazing things waiting for our wits to grow sharper.
I think that's right. Right.
It's like, and we're just hopefully coming to this fullness of realization and this idea that we can, through language, we can smash and demolish by our spoken word.
Which is way different than avoiding, outrunning, ignoring. Right, to smash it. So I'll tell you a true story. Woman was divorced, waited almost 5 years before she went on her first date, right? Just trying to build up this courage. So she meets this guy for lunch, right? She's reading out like all the top things to do, like don't go to dinner, that kind of thing. And she was probably in her mid-40s. So they meet at this restaurant for lunch. They're not even really 11 minutes into this sit down. Well, then he stands up and says, let's just call this good. This is not going well. There's no chemistry here. We're not vibing. You're really lucky that I've even stayed this long. I mean, because look at you. You clearly don't care about yourself. I mean, you're out of shape. I mean, look at how big your hips are. I mean, your eyes are sunken. I mean, I really did you a favor even just staying this long. And then he walked away. Now, I can only imagine what you're thinking, Brilliant, and what those that just heard me tell this story. But let me flip with this a little bit. That's not what he said. That's what she was saying to herself.
Mm.
And we do this, not constant, but in these moments that tend to matter.
Yeah.
The chatter is loud and it's cruel.
Right.
And had she had this affirmation to smash and destroy, that moment could have been completely different.
Yeah.
Sitting on this date in the afternoon in New York City.
Yeah,
Love
absolutely.
That.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing too, man, that I just want, like I'm geeked out by, is that there is or can be power in language that we can feel, right? And sometimes it's based on the rhythm, the cadence, you know, the particular words, the mixture of consonants and vowels. And it doesn't even need to be super analytical, but like you can, by speaking it aloud, and I think speaking it even more perhaps than just reading it.
Right.
And that ability, I think there's something really profound that's available to us. Again, it's not in the act of affirmations or even incantations, but like just availing ourselves of a power or a clarity, you know, that's accessible that we might have not been present to if we hadn't been working with tools like words.
It's so good, Brilliant. I mean, my mom from my earliest memory. So my full name is Michael Dean Miles. So Michael, right? Name of the most powerful angel, Michael the angel, the messenger. And when you go and just looking at, you know, what's the meanings of names, right? And the origins of names that we give our children. My mom was quick to let me know that Michael and Michael Dean together just means courageous at heart. Now, that doesn't have to be true, but that's what my mom told me. And so when I got to these moments from as a young boy, scared of the dark basement, to having to walk home late at night, to asking the girl out on the first date, you know, or asking a girl to a dance, to my first interview for a job, to applying for college, to asking my wife to marry me, to starting my own business, right? That my name meant something.
Yeah, for sure.
And it pushed me into doing something that maybe I wouldn't have done, which created motion, which causes results and consequences.
Yeah. Language is powerful. Can be.
Well, it is. It's either going to be used for you or against you.
Yeah. I have heard a belief that every word either creates, sustains, or destroys. And again, that's a little metaphysical, but interesting to think about. Just when you greet someone, when you are having a conversation with someone, what is the energy? What is the intention behind it? And I think there's a point, admittedly, where we can overthink that, but there's also, I think, a lot of times where we benefit by at least inquiring within ourselves,
What a great topic.
Dean, I know we're at the end of our time today, but I have really enjoyed this conversation. I learn a lot every time we talk.
Same.
I'm enjoying getting to know you even better. Courageous at heart. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Great topics, great inquiries.
Well, let's do it again sometime.
I have a feeling we will.
We'll see what we can do to help ourselves and those who are listening to be great coaches, to earn recognition and money, to live good lives of health, happiness, and meaning.
Yeah, hear, hear. Thank you, brilliant.